There she is.
Hello,
How you going, Maggie?
Go up a bit more. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I think we both navigated the technology. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, hang on. It's early days.
Yeah, there's plenty of time for us to stuff this up between the two of us, I think, isn't there?
Got my cuppa.
You got your cuppa. I'm going with water because if I drink a cup of this late, I will not be able to sleep. So I'll go water, Maggie.
Wow, I'm a tea lady. So first thing in the morning, last thing at night.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. My body
So
says
everyone's just coming in now, Maggie, and we'll just give them a couple of minutes. So Maggie and I will just talk as though we're having a cuppa like normal in the meantime, and we won't start. We'll start in 2 or 3 minutes. We'll just give everyone a chance.
Great. Sounds great. Nice. I'm glad you're going to be looking after all those questions.
I've got my piece of paper. I'm so old school that I actually just printed things out, right? So
yeah, I love that. You're using the word old school and you're young. I'm the old one.
No comment, Maggie. No comment.
Mind you, I'm pretty proud of myself, you know, jumping on Insta.
Just like the cool kids.
That's it. I'm a real cool old chook.
There you go. All right, folks, if you've just joined us, we're going to start in maybe 1 minute. We'll just give people one last chance to get on in here, and then I will kick off proceedings. Proceedings are so formal, isn't it, Maggie?
It is, yeah. We just get the show on the road.
Get the show on the road.
Get this show on the road. You can tell I'm an old drama.
There you go. There's people commenting. I don't know if you can see it, Maggie, but one of the things about Instagram Lives is you get like this stream of comments above your face. So someone's just called you a legend though, Maggie.
I can see a few of those little things, but what's going on? I've got my bra on.
Called you a legend. Someone said Maggie's a legend.
A legend! Oh my God!
I think there's going to be a lot more Maggie comments than Brad comments tonight. I'm okay with that.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because I do have my tracky pants on and my Uggies.
Someone's just asked, Maggie, now this is a good one to start with. How did we meet? We've never met in person, have we?
I think something happened online. Someone said to me, oh, look, there's a really great guy who makes a lot of sense. And he sounds a bit like you when he explains things. And I thought, oh, great, that's lovely. And then I don't think you sent me your book. Somebody else, somehow or other that happened. And then I got your book and went, oh, he's a cracker. Yeah, I've got to get to know him. And that's kind of how it happened, I think.
So, yeah, and I think we spoke on the phone then, and we've sort of virtually met. And then some people out there might enjoy this story. I was speaking at a conference recently, and I messaged Maggie the night before and said, "Hey, Maggie, check out this conference. I'm on the list of speakers." And then within 3 hours, Maggie's got herself a prime spot on the speaking agenda in that conference, and before me as well.
It was so weird because, of course, they recognised my name. It was a big psychology one, and looking at, and of course, I really like to be kept up to date. But what was so funny was between the time that I'd gone and enrolled, a major speaker had pulled out, and so they got to shove her in.
Yeah,
it was actually fascinating. I learned so much from that one, Brad. It was really good.
Right. So look, we might get going because otherwise, Maggie, you and I are just going to talk about irrelevant stuff, I think, the whole time. So we've got about 250 of you here. Thanks very much for joining us. So I might just go through a very quick and informal introduction. Maybe we'll introduce ourselves, Maggie. So for those of you who don't know, or those of you that are Maggie diehards, my name is Brad Marshall, and I'm a child psychologist, a PhD researcher, the author of The Tech Diet for Your Child and Teen, and the director of the Internet Addiction Clinic at Kidspace, the oldest internet addiction clinic in Australia, I think. No one's stopped me before when I've said that, so I'm pretty sure that's true. Maggie, it might be a bit silly here, but do you want to just give us a couple of lines for anyone who isn't familiar with your work?
Oh, absolutely. I'm an accidental parenting educator and author. That's probably, I have no idea quite how I got to be here. But I am known as kind of the queen of common sense, and I have a passion for research, and I have a passion for helping families and schools kind of understand this crazy thing called parenting and raising children. And if there's the biggest challenge in the world today, it is raising them in a digital world that their parents weren't immersed in as children. So that's why these conversations are so helpful, so they can make some sense. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think what you skipped over there, Maggie, was the like 6 or 7 best-selling books that you've written and all the rest of it as well. But anyway,
and the Parental as Anything podcast. So
yeah,
sorry.
the Parental as Anything podcast as
you
well.
also are on an episode of, which is a great one to listen to. Gosh, see, I'm not very good at self-promotion. Anyway, we're done. Let's move on.
All right, so folks, look, Maggie and I came up with this idea, I think late last week. It's nothing sort of formal. We're not going to try and speak at you or present anything. I guess really what we talked about was just that we both saw a lot of questions coming in from parents that were really stressed out about screen time and what to do about this homeschooling thing, lockdown on the eastern states in Australia anyway, or anywhere around the world. I just saw someone say they're dialing in from Barcelona in Spain, Maggie. So from anywhere around the world where you're struggling to manage screens in this sort of COVID era as well. I should probably set the parameters a little bit here. We'll be here till about 9:15 because otherwise Maggie and I will fade very quickly. We're not going to be able to answer all of your questions, unfortunately. So please be patient with us. Everyone that sent in a question earlier, I've taken some of those and collated them on my piece of paper here. So if you see me looking down, I'm just reading a piece of paper. I haven't fallen asleep. But essentially, we're going to go through some of the questions. And I would also encourage people, if questions come up, we might try and attend to them if I can figure out the technology, and Maggie can as well. But essentially, Maggie and I are just going to chat and try and talk through some of the answers. One of the important parts here, though, is that we might often give an answer that is a non-COVID answer, if you will. So if there was no lockdown, this is what would be ideal. And then we'll try to attempt a what do you do in a lockdown answer as well. And the other thing that I should probably just mention is often when we're answering these questions, we might refer to children, meaning usually primary school, right, Maggie, for children,
Yeah.
and then teenagers, meaning high school for the most part, and then kind of preschool kids as well. So there's some different age groups as well. Just seen a couple of questions there. Will this be saved? Yes, this will be saved. Apparently, I don't know how to do that, but my team will save it and put it up tomorrow, and maybe Maggie's will as well. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Someone will figure it out. So I'm going to kick things off. I'm going to read one of the questions here, and we're going to go with, yeah.
Can I just jump in first and just let's give a bit of a focus of that context of pre-pandemic and in the midst of it. So let's really be honest that this, incredible global pandemic, which has just created so much uncertainty and stress, has shifted those parameters. But I need to know everyone who's in lockdown, particularly in Australia at the moment, in Sydney, you're in week 6 and it could be, week 10 and it could be beyond. You are getting crabby. You are exhausted and you will be shouting at your kids more and you'll be throwing any device and any TV at them. And I need you to let you know this is called survival, right? This is survival because we really are all on edge around this out of control state and we don't know when it's going to end. We're much better when we know something's going to end. So that's constantly gnawing away at you, activating cortisol. And then, of course, our kids pick that up sometimes. Now, you called it homeschooling. It's actually remote learning because, of course, we're not so becoming teachers as a former teacher.
Yeah.
I can tell you that there are some days, if you can get 2 hours out of your kids, do a tick, that's great. Break it up into blocks. Tell your kids you've got to get some schoolwork done. What we're finding from teachers is that they're really exhausted as well.
Yeah. And
they're concerned about their students. So we're looking at everything is now towards A, survival, and B, well-being. And well-being is relationships and emotional connection and safety. So as we're answering some of these, I hope that means that some days we're, as you said, that's why we've got pre-COVID and in the midst of, because it's slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely, Maggie. I agree. And I think if anyone's hearing us answer one of these questions and it kind of sounds a bit unrealistic, keep in mind it might be for the people that are not in lockdown. or it might be for when lockdown finishes as well. But yeah, we'll definitely keep all of that in mind. I'm going to kick off with one of these questions here, and I'm going to take one at a little bit of random here. Okay, so we've obviously made all of these anonymous because we're not here to sort of put anyone on show. So this person's written in, with homeschooling, my primary age child or children are using technology a lot more to complete their education, socialise, to keep them busy when I'm working from home. I'm concerned that they're becoming used to this higher usage, which I don't think is positive. Any tips? Maggie, you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, I'll kick that off. I just need you to know that habits are neural pathways that have been activated a lot in the brain. And that's why this is. So, and again, yes, they are needing to use technology to complete their schoolwork, and thank goodness for things like reading eggs and mathematics and games and things that actually are still educational. Even Minecraft in my world is quite educational and creative. But what my suggestion to you is that the habits they're forming now over a couple of months can be, I use this word, it's not in the English language, but you can unhabit them. So later on, what we do is we create a new habit, but it takes some time to create the neural pathway of the new habit. It's a bit like us in our New Year's resolutions. We start off with great gusto, but all those old habits are pretty strong. So it's going to be about gradually replacing those, recognising that some of this time online is about them connecting with friends and social aspects that we need for their mental well-being. So reassure you, you can change habits. I mean, that's your job. That is actually what you do all the time. But I'm just suggesting these ones without a diagnosed addiction. Anything to do too much of is a habit that can be unhabited gently and carefully.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you can sort of rework those neural pathways, as you were saying, Maggie, but it takes a little bit of time. And I think that's a really key point, because I think from the last lockdown that Sydney had anyway, a lot of parents got really panicked when trying to come out of that, and gosh, what have I lost? And my child's gone backwards in so many ways. You can get back there, but it takes a little while. What I would say and what I see in clinic is it's important, to not give up any ground unnecessarily. So what I'm talking about there are some core things like sleep.
Yes.
That, really, and you'll probably hear this a lot tonight, folks, that focusing more on the really bigger things like sleep and not giving up ground there, versus do we care whether they're doing 90% of their homework or 80% or 70%? Probably not. So I think that sleep is a big one for me that you'll probably hear me mention a lot of times tonight, and that is one that's going to be a lot more difficult to get back when they're getting back into school and stuff like that. So I think we've kind of touched on that one there. Let me have a look here. Okay, my kids are hanging out with the next door neighbours during lockdown. Oh, I don't know how they're doing that, but anyway, the neighbours' kids always seem to be on their devices and are barely being monitored by their parents. This leads to our own kids always asking for iPads, wanting TikTok, other social media. They don't say how old their kids are, but and they are now even trying to avoid normal daily activities like playing outside. How can we manage this without offending our neighbours?
Yeah, this is a really big one, because I've had this at different times. That people have different boundaries around those expectations. And I have worked with some families whose kids have been quite traumatised when the 7-year-old was allowed to play on the other 7-year-old's Grand Theft Auto 18 plus, which is rape and murder of women. So again, it's conversations, that we have to have with our kids. But when they go into other spaces, that's another conversation, isn't it? But I'm going to say welcome to parenting, because your job is the one who chooses what is right for your children as much and as often as possible. And yep, they're going to say they hate you and you're the worst parent on the planet. But those boundaries really do matter. Absolutely. And you know how you said they're doing the things they usually do? You just got to up the ante a bit. And that means, if you have got a backyard, then you're going to have to create something a bit more exciting than what you've got already. Like if you've got a trampoline, you're going to have some competitions where they nearly knock each other out or something. You've got to up the ante. But quite often what ups it is when parents get in and actually enjoy the games as well. So again, never ever surrender to this moment. This is going to come up so many times in parenting now, where I feel it's easier to just give them something. And I am going to say that, you know, at the end of the day, you may end up having a very difficult conversation with your neighbour about content that's appropriate for children, because I still see many kids under 13 who are on TikTok who, yes, the dances are fun and you can do some fun things, but gee, there's some horrendous videos on there that they can stumble into, which is actually not just destroying their innocence, it's actually creating anxiety about how frightened they get from it. And then they won't share it with mum and dad because you'll take it off them. So I think it's about us making sure that parents are as well informed as possible. Thank goodness for the eSafety Commissioner site in Australia. It's absolutely brilliant. I would follow a couple of those people who work with students all over Australia and what really is happening, because they keep giving really sound, doable advice on how you can manage this crazy moving world.
Yeah, look, and I would take that also with the lens of what do you do during lockdown versus what do you do during not a lockdown. I think during lockdown it's very difficult to manage that, because what I hear from a lot of parents is, you know, that they are getting outside and they can't do much else because it's just the neighbours' kids, they've got to stay within the area. And so should I deprive them of that social interaction? And I understand that, but as Maggie pointed out, you still do have to do what's best for your child. And so if you feel like they're interacting on different apps or different games that are just not safe for them, then you are going to have to step in and put those boundaries in place, or have that uncomfortable conversation with your neighbours' parents. And that may get uncomfortable. In the out of lockdown scenario, I think it is a little bit easier to put firmer boundaries in place, right, Maggie? Because you know that there are other opportunities where you're going to have to steer them towards, you know, other children. Not that those kids are bad or anything like that, but just that if what they're doing just doesn't sit well with you as a parent, then you're going to steer your kids towards other friendships, hopefully. Yeah.
I think developmentally, you know, up to 5, that's a different window again, isn't it, Brett? Because the kind of need for them to be immersed in a real world using all their senses is fundamental to a whole development of a whole child. And what we know is that, you know, that what does it displace if I hand them an iPad? What would they be doing if they didn't have it? Now, I'm a firm believer under 5 that if you need some time, and seriously, who doesn't want to wee in peace? You know, like some days, just give me a break. I would put them in front of the TV, in front of a good CC program, which doesn't have advertisements, because I know nothing awful is going to happen while I am having my wee. What tends to happen too is little boys will keep moving and do somersaults and fart on each other, and so
or
what's
try
happening?
And climb over a stair gate. So I should probably fill people in, because otherwise it's just going to turn into a chat between you and I, Maggie. I freaked out a little bit, my wife a little bit more than me, but with my little 2-year-old bloke, I sent Maggie the other night a little picture of him. He had pushed, he pushed a table to the edge of a stair baby gate and was ready. He was sizing this thing up like, I'm going over. And I took a picture knowing that he was safe, but I said to Maggie, I'm pretty sure we're going to need help with this, because my daughter is like the most compliant daughter you've ever met. She's beautiful. And so anyway, Maggie talked my wife and I back off the ledge and said, it's okay. He's just being adventurous, spirited young bloke. But yes, things do happen when you turn your back and they don't have screens, right?
Yeah, and so that's the other thing too is, it's the movement stuff. I must admit the 2 things that a handheld device will take away is movement and play with other children, no matter what sort it is. And that's what your boy was doing. He was being a little adventure. Mind you, one of my granddaughters at 2.5, I got a photo from my daughter-in-law, and there is my little, she is very like that. So she's a bit like Nanny. On the top of the fence, they have a wire fence with wood on the top, with a hose over her shoulder, about to leap over the fence, because she was being a fireman. And the same sort of thing, like they're going, what if she escapes? And I said, I'm pretty sure she'll come back. But these are the things that they're meant to do to stretch and grow.
Yeah.
These are the things you can't do if you're locked into something that is absorbing you and you're in that hunched up position. And that's the other thing developmentally, keeping that balance as much as possible in early years between green and screen. and recognising that we have had a significant drop in children turning up as 5-year-olds in Australian classrooms, a drop in oral vocab, a drop in gross and fine motor skills, a drop in self-regulation, and a drop in the capacity to initiate and sustain play. All of those pretty much are directly linked to a displacement of what children are meant to be doing in the early years.
Right, and so while we're on that, Maggie, because there's a question here on our list that I'll just read out because I think it sort of segues really well into that. So the question is, I'm interested in how we can set up our 3-year-old and 5-month-old with healthy screen habits. So far, we just navigate TV time, but I'm sure iPad time and gaming is going to hit.
Probably answered that, so leave it as late as possible, except for wonderful sounds, and there's some beautiful music and bedtime stuff that you can use in a device or a phone. I would keep the visual and locked in, because one of the things the research is starting to show is that even the earliest games that you can give children to do as 3 and 5, up to 3 and 5, many of them have got built-in reward systems, which means we're setting our kids up to become gamblers later, needing to be rewarded to do what they should be doing from what we call an inner locus of control. And so again, I'm really concerned that what it does is it creates a sense of what I call digital abandonment from their key caregivers, which is how we form attachment. So, you know, as little as possible, seriously, because what happens sometimes, you'll notice, is the flashing blue lights just mesmerize their sensitive brains. Their brains are so underdeveloped that really what it's doing is not allowing them to do things slowly. If you've ever seen how long your son takes to go from your car to your front door, that is exactly the speed with which they're meant to be doing things at times.
And I guess, so my answer to that question about I think it was a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old. I mean, the short answer is that a 6-month-old really shouldn't have any screens. Now, you know, if you're sitting there and watching something and he or she is in the bassinet or something, or sitting down, then it's not going to be the end of the world. They're not going to self-combust. Their brain's not going to explode. But we certainly shouldn't be setting up a bassinet and showing them, you know, funny lights. And I guess that's in line with a lot of the pediatric associations and the amount of screen use that you should have for under 1, which is nothing, basically. For a 3 or 4-year-old, you know, most of the guidelines suggest that about 2 hours of screen time. And for anyone at home that's not familiar with Maggie or myself, then we talk about screen time versus gaming time or TV time or whatever else, iPad time. It's all just screen time. So that's what the research indicates, and you've got to count it all together, right? So get away from this idea of, you know, sitting on the sidelines, well, not right now, of a soccer match, and you know, the other parent is sitting there saying, my child only goes 1 hour of screen time or 1 hour of gaming. But if you actually add it all up, it does add up. So I think without lockdown, you know, you're talking about 2 hours of screen time for that 3 or 4-year-old. And I would also say to that parent that did write in, be very careful with introducing iPads too early. So for me, it's really important that big chunky thing on the wall called the TV, the old school one, it does limit their expectations of when they're going to have that time. If you start to give phones and iPads, you end up on a bit of a slippery slope where you're at a restaurant or wherever you are, and all of a sudden they want it, right? I mean, there's this classic story that I tell Maggie that, I don't know if I've told you this one, in February when we could actually go on holidays, I took the family to SeaWorld on the Gold Coast, and they just loved it. But I was walking around and there was probably a 2-year-old in a pram on a phone watching YouTube, and I couldn't help myself but think, why does that child need a phone in SeaWorld? We're in an amusement park. Of all places that you should not need a phone. And again, maybe there were other circumstances because people get upset when I say that. But so for that parent that wrote in, try and keep the screen time to the amounts we've talked about. Now, in saying that, during lockdown, screen time is going to be more. And let's not all get, you know, our knickers in a knot about that. My kids' screen time during lockdown is more. It's not ideal, but as Maggie said, we can wind it back. But I'm not going from 2 hours to like 8 hours, right?
But also, it's what are they? observing. So we know
Yes.
if they're not, what are they interacting with? Now, one of the things that can give you some great space, and what we know from the research, is that if you plonk your kids, in front of a TV with, something like iView that's a streaming thing, so there's no ads, but also you put them on with their favourite cartoon that they've seen many times. What happens to the brain? It goes, oh, beaut, it's Bluey. I don't have to work hard here because it's like an old friend. And also because that sense of real and imaginary is blurred with little children. And then the third thing is they don't have to work hard to predict what the plot is because they've already seen it. So it's actually this beautiful neurochemical flood of, so you can get some time with that. And that's one of the things the idea is it's a bit boring is a good thing.
Yeah,
you see?
absolutely.
It's so
and we should probably now, because I've probably got all these parents at home going, what about primary school age kids and high school age kids in lockdown? What do we do? And so there are many questions sort of on my sheet here, but I'll just paraphrase a couple of them. And I've been seeing this in the clinic as well. So a lot of those questions around, what should you do during homeschooling with screens? Because the classic children flicking screens to YouTube or gaming or any of these sorts of things and not doing their work. So I'll give my sort of stock standard, what do you do? And then maybe Maggie, you can jump in after that. So what I've been saying to parents during lockdown for Sydney or anywhere else is that, first of all, and I mentioned this before, just lower your bar. Straight away, they're not going to do as much work as they would do at school. And so if they're doing 70 or 80% of the work that school are sending home and they're getting the assessments in, then great. But one of the ways and one of the really clear strategies I've been asking parents to do here is to not micromanage this. So from my book, right, with the 7 steps, the unplug steps, one of them is they're all designed so that parents don't hover over and micromanage their child. And that's really important because it creates so much conflict when you do that. And so the way to do that during lockdown, again, it's not ideal, but this is lockdown. So the way to do that would be to check in with teachers, especially if you've got high school kids, all their different teachers, at the end of the week. And just be clear with your child, you're running on 2 things here. They have to attend all the classes, which is Zoom or Teams or whatever they're doing, and they have to hand in all their work, knowing full well that a lot of it's going to be a bit of a half effort, but that's all you're asking them to do. And if the teacher on a Friday is coming back to you saying, geography teacher saying his assignment's not in, then you go to him with that. But so many families are getting stressed out while they're trying to work, micromanaging that. I'm in a meeting here, but I'm looking over my son's computer here and he's flicked to YouTube. Just give them a bit of space and just check in with those points of time at the end of a week there. It kind of puts the onus a little bit back on the school as well to just tell you when work's not in. Maggie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because as an old teacher, I've got quite a few thoughts. And the first one is make sure you don't do any of it for them. That's just not helpful at all. The second one is in a full school day, there's so many things that happen. So you're aiming for around 2 to 3 hours. It's about how much real learning. And trust me, in some of my Year 9 English classes, that were 10 minutes. Seriously, it was so
here, isn't it, Maggie?
So we need to be realistic around it. I think what schools are working out is that they have had to back off a little because they've recognised that everyone is really not travelling so well. And when we work out the absolutely essential things, so when a teacher is having to teach a concept or actually do some teaching, absolute full attention needs to be on that. Right. The consolidation of that task, that's different. That means you get some practice things to do, which could be done at a different time. Morning tends to be better for most brains, although we know teenagers are better a bit later in the morning. But I would break it into chunks. Kids can't do large amounts of time, particularly if you've got, boys. And I'm going to say one of the things, I love that you said that, handing it back to the kids, is this is the task that your teacher wants you to do. But if you want to do it laying on the floor in your bed or standing on your head in the corner, you can go for it, because most of the time they do not need the internet to do the work. And every now and then we've got to make a bit of a suss out of that, because if you've turned the Wi-Fi, but mind you, your co-parent is actually having a Zoom meeting that's important, that won't happen. But I think we need to recognise that kids learn in different ways, and that stressed brains don't learn well, so that the option of having brain breaks and healthy snacks, running around the backyard, doing some push-ups, if you're in an apartment, whatever, create something that discharges cortisol for everybody in the house.
Yeah.
Because until we've got enough dopamine, we can't concentrate and focus. You can't force kids to focus if they haven't got dopamine in the brain. And so once you get that sort of thing, you realise, okay, so we're going to go for a bike ride, because that might give my co-parent time to do a really important meeting, and maybe next time they'll do that for me. Or my other big tip is the designated parent T-shirt. Get the kids to make one for you, so that parent is on duty for that hour and a half, and the other parent is actually really locked away to do serious work. Come out, connect, because I want to see both of you, and then swap over, because we've got to prioritise the most important part of our work in order to keep our jobs.
Maggie, I love that.
You sit down with a plan.
I love the shirt idea is just brilliant. So I've got a best mate, and I swear his wife is doing like 90% of it. I'm going to get him that shirt. He will hate me.
And the other thing is, we have to recognise that every one of us in a home needs a break or something that fills our cup. And because you can go out, now remember, some of the things that made us feel better and made dopamine and serotonin instead of cortisol, we're going to a yoga class, or having a game of squash, or going to the gym, where we can't do those things. We've got to work out something that we can do regularly during the week, at least 3 times a week. So if that means, you've got to go for a run, you've got to go for a surf, you want to do an online yoga class, that gets prioritised into the diary of the family.
Yeah.
And we've got to sit down with our kids and go, so what's yours? What is your physical activity? Because this is ours. Yeah. And if you don't find one, then you're coming running with me. Yeah. Or whatever. Does that make sense?
And that's a great one, because you know where I stand on this, as far as, even without lockdown, sleep and exercise for kids, not just because exercise as far as blowing off steam and cortisol and the rest of it, but also just from a social element. So during lockdown, you mentioned at the start, Maggie, how important routine is, and in general for humans, right? And so it's about finding your routine as a family, and trying to get into a routine in the mornings, and then that routine during the day for homeschooling, whether they're in primary school or high school, and then the after school routine as well. So one of the blokes that I saw, little fellas, I think he's 11, that I saw last in my clinic tonight, he has this routine with his mate where they go for a bike ride at 3:15, exactly when school finishes, every afternoon. And that's just brilliant. And I don't think the parents even understood how great it is for him to have that routine every single day. For my family, every morning it's taking the kids for a walk during lockdown to this great boardwalk that we've got, and along the beach. And the little fella has a run, and my daughter plays on a scooter and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But just trying to get that routine, because for anyone out there that has younger kids, 2, 3, 4, 5, it can be very anxiety provoking, this whole lockdown. They don't quite understand what's going on. And so as much of a routine as you can keep going there. So one of the other things we do, Maggie, is I got a little fire pit in my backyard, and we started having a fire on, a couple of afternoons a week. So my daughter and my son know that it's just a bit of a routine. It's a wind down time. It's something to do outside.
Marshmallows.
Stop my son from jumping in the fire, but anyway.
Marshmallows.
Yeah, and it's just something that keeps the routine going. So for any of the families out there, anything that you can do in your area to keep that routine is really important.
And there's a second thing to routine.
Questions, but anyway, you keep going, Maggie.
The second thing to routine is make sure that you do really crazy things, unpredictable things that are funny. So, even putting on a tiara, and it doesn't matter whether it's dad or mum, or running around doing bear hunts in your house, you do unpredictable things, and it excites the brain like anything. So again, we have to dig deep. We have the prefrontal lobe that is able to step in and go, hang on, the kids are really fading here. We've got to do something. So if it's not a plate full of really good snacks, then it's time to be completely ridiculous. And whether it's you want to sit around and tell crazy jokes, chase each other there around the house, be a dinosaur, or get into a pub, build a new cubby. You've got to do these things when you see your kids, you know, like flagging or escalating, because it's either way, they run out of energy or it builds up. Our kids need us to get back to number 4 on the arousal state. And it doesn't often take long. Hide and seek for a few minutes, crazy music, and sometimes that's why I quite like those dance-offs on TikTok, because Dad's dancing was one of the funniest things I saw. So can you see again, it's keeping the bar low of expectations, which means your house might not be as tidy as usual.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Right? Let it go. Just let it go. And then every now and then, check in with your kids, but check in with your partner, and then get your kids to check in with each other as well, because all this moving barometer. And if a parent starts to get crabby and really poopy, and I think also there's a lot of grief coming back up at the moment, Brad, because we're grieving for that life we had. We're grieving for people we can't see. I'm grieving for my beautiful 8-week-old grandson in WA where they've locked borders. So we've got to prioritise making sure that we have a good cry, or when we run to get rid of excess emotion out of our body. Otherwise, it's going to come out at our kids.
Yeah.
And they need to see us struggling.
Sorry, Maggie. Sorry, Maggie. So someone's just raised a really good point. Excuse me. About, you know, how do I raise the excitement levels of a 13-year-old boy? And I guess I saw that one on there just because I think 13 is such a really tough age. It's approaching that year 9 sort of joke that we had before for boys, especially, where they can be really difficult. And I think for a lot of boys, because this is another question that keeps coming in for both of us, Maggie's, so many 13, 14, 15-year-old boys especially, but girls too on social media, just keep telling mum and dad during these lockdowns, oh, you know, I'm online because that's all my friends are doing. And I guess I just keep having this repeat conversation with parents that even for someone like me who runs an internet addiction clinic, I'm okay with it if they're socializing with friends, okay? You don't want to go anywhere near this magical 7 hours of screen time a day, which I've talked about many times, but basically the functional MRI scans say that that's not a good idea. Your brain cortex can thin prematurely, and that's not great. But I guess in broad strokes, though, if you have a 13-year-old that wants to game for an extra hour or something a day, it's not going to break us during lockdown, okay? And it will help you, as Maggie said, the parents need to take a break too. So if that time is then used for you to go for a run yourself or have a bath or whatever you're doing, then it's win-win. We just want to make sure that they're still ticking some of the other boxes, like getting out of the house and exercising, and they're still going to sleep vaguely on the same time. Sleep's an interesting one too, Maggie. Have you heard, because there's a lot of kids going, oh, well, you know, the teenage logic here, Maggie, so I don't have to get up to commute to school anymore, so I've got an extra hour, so I'm going to go to bed an hour late. I don't know. Have you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, and I want to touch on teen logic. There was a question there that talked about a teenage boy being a bit oppositional and being, you know, disrespectful and shouting and yelling. And I went, they did that before we had a pandemic. Trust me, that's completely normal. And I think it's very much recognising that they all think they know what's best for them, right? And what they don't understand is that they're as they go into that early adolescent stage, the brain pruning really takes off some really important bits that are useful, like organisation skills and memory. So they get really defensive around, oh, did I say I was going to get off then? But not only that, GABA goes offline, and that's that beautiful butyric acid, which is the impulse inhibitor in brains. That goes off in adolescence. So we find it hard sometimes to get off. So we really need to recognise that as a challenge for them. Now, my challenge, if you have boys, is that if you come in with a physiology of your body that you're going to give them a hard time, you've lost them. If you try and eyeball them, if you want to talk to them when they're hungry, they have an erection, they've just got out of bed, and they were still, you know, like you've got to pick timing.
Yeah.
And we know that if you haven't built rapport with your boy, he just thinks you're going to lecture him and he shuts you out. So it's about, how do I communicate? How do I do that? And I've got an article on my website which is, you know, all about those things, comes out of the book. And I think when we can see that they really don't want to be awful, but they're biologically driven to have fun, take risks, and not do schoolwork because what's in it for me?
Yeah.
This is
pretty
normal.
hard during the lockdown, right? How do you have fun, take risks, and not do schoolwork during a lockdown? It's pretty difficult.
And it's online is where I can do all that, right? So we've got to cut them some slack. However, we do have to have conversations around the violent content they see and the pornography they see, because we know that that can easily be a slippery slide. But it's not going to create them to have the mindset or the kind of view of being a healthy young man one day. So again, we have to have those conversations. And I think, they don't want to have them with us, but we absolutely have to have those conversations. It says, you know what? And this is one thing I thought of when I went for a walk with my dog today, that if I had a boy who was really giving me a hard time about how much time, you know, and because I hate Skinnerism and rewards, but I think it might be time in the middle of a pandemic to go, okay, so, you know, the option is you've got around about 2 hours after all your schoolwork's done.
Yeah.
Now, I'll come near the end of that to see if you're near the top of your level, finishing that level. If you want more time, then I've got a list of chores. You do the chores and you can get a bit more time. I just think we need to step it up and make them, you know, like I said, I'm not really keen on those sorts of things. I just think they should do chores because they're part of a family. But I know it's really hard to convince boys to see, well, I don't care if the bed's made. I don't care if that happens. You don't have to wash my shirt. I'll just keep on wearing it. I'll turn my undies in the other way and it's fine.
Especially during a lockdown, right? As if the boys going to care about washing during a lockdown.
See, and that leads into the one about sleep, because if they can maintain a good bedtime, and you will have to get up to double check, and I do really think you've got to turn your Wi-Fi off and get all devices out of bedrooms to ensure this happens. But if they're able to get that sleep, I would be rewarding them with 15 more minutes on a game, because we know that sleep impacts everything the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was just a comment there. What do you think about the trend to limit internet times? And I did have a bit of a chuckle at myself while reading that, because I will lay claim to, I'm pretty sure I started that trend. So
I love it.
I guess the reason that I started that trend, if you want to call it that, to the person who asked that, it wasn't something that I just sort of plucked out of nowhere. Certainly there's a research paper, I'm not going to bore people, Maggie, I promise, at 9 o'clock, but in 2013, a Scandinavian paper that basically said for boys that game, there's a big difference between them gaming online versus offline. So when they game online with friends or with a stranger, whoever, there's a whole bunch of dopamine that goes to the brain, versus when they offline, there's still dopamine, but it's a lot less. And it's the same for social media and everything. So essentially, that's why I am one of these people that typically has found that managing the internet is probably more important than managing individual screens. And I think that's still true in the pandemic, right? Is that, so as Maggie said, sleep is so important. Turn the Wi-Fi off in the evenings. And there's a whole host of different ways.
And you've got to be careful. You've got to be so careful, because our boys are so savvy at being able to. So we had a unit in Perth there for a long time, and you know, I had a sort of like, you know, NBN on the wall there, and the number of times I got back to Perth and there was just nothing left in my. Yeah, there was a 14-year-old boy that lived next door. He was just stealing all my Wi-Fi. So at the end of the day, I just really believe this is where we set those healthy boundaries around for our kids, because they can't put them in place, because there's no way they want to come offline. And what we're finding also with many of our girls is they get embedded into that drama that happens at night. And before you know it, whatever's happened has escalated because people have misread things, and then the nastiness that can come out will keep them awake because it's distressed them. And then you're going to have really grumpy girls the next day who haven't sorted out what's going on, and now they can't see each other in a school environment. It just escalates. And again, and I'm going to say that those sorts of triggers are all contributors towards the suicidal ideation of many of our kids is the distress that happens in that digital place. So if we make sure that we give them, and depending on age, so in our home, that means mum and dad come offline at the same time. Yep. So the idea is that we all model it.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are so many teens that keep telling me that the homes that started to do that, within they hate their parents for the first 3 or 4 days. And then what happens, because they get all this beautiful, rich sleep, they're less grumpy, they're friendlier, they're kind of like these different people that morph into it. And also their friends learn to adjust to when they're disappearing online. So in other words, all their social media stuff and gaming is fitted in before that boundary happens.
Yeah, yeah.
They still want to play with those friends. And then before you know it, that family has decided that's a good idea too. And we can kind of have a collective influence of all the people in our kids' circles.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to end up down a different path. I'm just conscious of time here because we're going to end up in that question of, you know, what do you do when their friend is saying that they've got a limited time and how do you manage all of that stuff as well? And I think we'll probably be here for another half an hour if we attempt that. I think what I'd like to do is just wrap things up a little bit for people because otherwise Maggie and I are going to fall off our chairs here a little bit. Certainly for anyone who's looking for more specific advice or techniques, Maggie has a whole bunch of resources at her website, and you've got webinars and videos and stuff too, Maggie?
Yep, totally. Yep. And don't forget that on the Parental If Anything one, we have your episode, which is about gaming.
Yep.
But we also have Dr. Christie, who talks very much about screens and families. So
Absolutely.
2 really great episodes on Parental As Anything on there.
Yeah, so there's the podcast Parental As Anything as well. And then on my website, got my book, but if you can't get that, then I've actually got a video series as well for parents who want to know what to actually implement at home. And I'm told that there's some code for discount or something, 30% off for mine. It's lockdown. I don't know. It'll be in some story after this, I'm told, apparently.
And I also have on my website, if you wanted to go into the search bar and put in COVID, that comes up with a document which is about 4 or 5 pages long, full of all sorts of ideas to do.
Yeah, right.
When you're losing it at home. Some of them are creative things, from treasure hunts to cooking to goodness only knows what. And there are some free digital e-books that I give out to people. But you're more than welcome to them if you've just got kids that drive you mad at home and you're not in lockdown. And Brett, I really just want to say thanks for this, because you and I get really frustrated at times that we can't kind of reach the people we were reaching, and we can't always offer help. So that's why we decided, let's do a freebie. Let's get out there and support everybody who's out there doing the best they can in this crazy parenting land.
Absolutely. And I think if we had our way, we would have done it at 9 a.m. because that's when Maggie and I would both work best. But I don't think that would have been too convenient for all the parents in lockdown trying to homeschool right now. Not homeschool, remote learn.
And guess what's happening? The basketball, the men are on. So I'm pretty happy that you got to get off now.
All right.
I'm a basketball freak. So
there you go. Go Boomers. All right, folks. Thanks very much for joining us. And thank you very much, Maggie. Thanks for your time. See you guys.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.